Thanks everybody for joining us today for another edition of the Storage Ahead webinar series. My name is Alex Bernath, and we are going to be talking about ROI, specifically driving more profit from your website and ROI and lead tracking from different sources online. So let's go ahead and get started. We will have a Q&A session at the end of this presentation. So go ahead, type in any questions as you have them. I'll address all those at the end. If there's something that you want me to go back over further, just let me know in that questions box and I will be sure to discuss it. So let's get started. First thing that we are going to do is I want to outline a couple points that we want to cover today and really the goals of doing this webinar. The first thing is understanding how to use lead tracking to calculate ROI of various online lead sources. So how do we calculate the ROI? And then using ROI to understand the performance of online marketing from various sources. We're going to talk specifically about SEO and your website, and we're also going to talk about pay-per-click as well as third-party aggregators. We're going to discuss using ROI to understand how to improve your online marketing. So what does these numbers and this data that we're going to come up with, what does it tell you? How do you use that information? And like I said before, we're going to use SEO, website, pay-per-click, and third-party aggregators as examples. So first, let's go ahead and define ROI. ROI is simply net revenue from a specific online marketing spend, so return on investment. Of course, return on investment can be calculated for anything. We're specifically talking about online marketing today. This is measured by cost per lead and cost per rental. So two things we're going to look at calculating today to get an idea of your ROI from those online lead sources. So define lead tracking. Lead tracking is the process of tracking leads generated through any marketing campaign. Now, online, of course, we have certain types of leads that are probably pretty standard. You've got phone calls, online reservations, direction prints. If you have the ability to print directions to your store on your website or on other online marketing, coupon prints, printing off coupons. A lot of times, printing off a coupon online will also capture user data, email address, name, information like that, what store they're printing the coupon off for, and then inquiries. So that's just simply a question that's posted on the website. How much is your 5x5 if I want to rent from December to January? So just the generic types of online leads presented here. We're going to specifically focus on phone calls. And to explain why, about 95% of all leads are phone calls. And I know a lot of people kind of question this or wonder whether or not it's the same for their locations. This does vary based on location. The only time that you'll find any significant difference is going to be, say, right next to a military base or really close to universities or other college campuses during May or August when people are leaving or coming back to school. You'll definitely see higher online reservations, inquiries. Just in general, younger people tend to use those online sources a little bit better, or a little bit more, I should say. But we still see about 95% of all leads are phone calls, just as an average across the country. Phone calls also have the highest conversion rate. And what I mean by that is from a leads to rental standpoint, you're going to get a much better conversion rate from a phone call than you are from an online reservation. There's that sense of human interaction. Somebody's actually spoken to your manager. They can get directions to the facility from where they're at. Generally, it's a local person who understands the area, and the customer feels really comfortable with that. And when you're storing your stuff, people want to store their stuff with somebody that they feel comfortable with. So there's always that level of human interaction that phone calls provide that the other lead sources don't. And then most important type of lead, just in general, in my opinion, is, once again, if we've got most leads are phone calls and they have the highest conversion rate, this is really what you should be focusing on if you're trying to measure performance of an online marketing campaign. Once again, all those other lead sources, or lead types, I should say, online reservations, they're all great. But if you're really trying to track performance of an online campaign, or any marketing for that matter, in this industry, the phone call is really the king of the lead types. So here's a glossary of terms that we are going to use for this presentation. VoIP, the first one, Voice over Internet Protocol. This is simply a method of phone tracking. There's multiple ways to track phone leads. We're going to talk about VoIP simply because they are cheap and it's a cheap and effective way to track phone calls. Cost per lead. Cost per lead is generated through a specific. Cost per lead generated through a specific marketing initiative. Cost per lead is essentially a dollar amount associated with a lead. Once again, we're going to look at phone calls, but you can associate this with any specific lead type or just all leads in general. Cost per rental. This is calculated using that cost per lead number that we just discussed. A good approximation is 1 in 7 phone calls rents, and that's online. Now, different marketing sources have different conversion rates, but just for the purpose of this webinar today, we're going to assume that cost per rental is the cost per lead times 7. Maximum cost per acquisition. This is the amount you are willing to spend to buy a tenant through marketing. So if you break down a renter and the value of a renter, which is the next one, lifetime value of a tenant, the average revenue you generate from one tenant, you then have to decide what is the maximum amount that I'm willing to spend to fill that unit. And this is something we're really going to look at later in the presentation when we're doing those examples. You've got to have that number and understand your lifetime value of a tenant and understand your maximum cost per acquisition so you can decide whether or not you are really getting what you need to be getting out of your online lead sources and whether or not they're sustainable as marketing. So let's go ahead and talk specifically about lead tracking. So why track leads? Many people still use visitors as the only method of performance tracking for their marketing, and this is actually very common. Traditionally, this was one of the only ways or the only accessible ways to track performance of a website. Visitors are a very good metric, but it's not the only metric. And what I mean by that is you can really get an idea of performance of, say, an SEO campaign. Where's my website showing up? How many click-throughs is my pay-per-click campaign actually driving? All of that is visitors is an indicator of that type of performance. However, there's a whole nother piece to that. If you've got great visitors and great traffic on your site, but you have very few leads, or you've got a really bad website where all the pages are broken, you're not going to drive any phone calls or any rentals off of that website. So really, it's better to understand how many leads are being generated. And this is really, there's two parts. Visitors is driving traffic to your page. Your website is driving those leads based on the quality of the website, the ability to interact, how fast can they interact with the website. So user interface and user experience. Lead tracking, in my opinion, is the only way to truly know whether or not your marketing dollars are working from driving traffic to actually getting rentals and filling up your units. Tracking phone calls. So like I mentioned, VoIP tracking numbers, which is the Voice over Internet Protocol. These numbers are managed over the internet instead of the public switch telephone network, which would be cell phones or landlines, any phone number you get from a carrier. VoIP numbers must forward to a number on the public switch telephone network. So those have to forward to a number managed by a carrier. Essentially, they're just placeholders in between the caller and your actual landline that capture data. They can capture data such as recording the call or the caller ID, the time and length of the call, and depending on what you're really trying to access, VoIP numbers have tons of capabilities, so you can do a lot with them. VoIP is cheap and effective, as I mentioned earlier. Out of installing hardware and some other options where, a lot of times people think of phone call recording and they think that they need to install hardware at their location to actually capture that data. VoIP numbers are extremely cheap and they're effective and they are so easy to set up. You set up one phone number, you put it on the website, and it will start recording all that data instantly. One thing I did note, there are many providers, so if you are looking for VoIP tracking numbers after this webinar, you decide that it's worth looking into, make sure that you shop around online. There are tons of providers, and some of them provide a lot more data, but they're more expensive, and a lot of them are made for agencies, so you'll find that it's pretty cost effective if you buy 10,000 phone numbers, but nobody needs 10,000 phone numbers unless you're a marketing agency. So shop around, you will be able to find a pretty good deal on it. So what does phone tracking tell us? Like you guys know, phone tracking really gives us two bits of data that we really need. One is how many leads are we getting? So for my website, Alex's storage, and on my location A, this is how many leads we're getting. So this is much better data than the visitors, right? I know this store versus this store gets 10 more phone calls per month. And I know that it's going up. When I look at historical data, my leads are going up, my phone calls are going up through my website. Now, it also tells me the quality of leads. There's a lot of lead sources online that may not drive the same quality of leads as others. So you can listen to those phone calls and you can really see this is a great lead source. We're getting a great conversion rate from leads to rentals from my website or from my pay-per-click campaign, whereas something else doesn't work as well. So those are the two things you need to understand that phone tracking provides. Next section is ROI. So we're going to talk about breaking down. We're going to use those examples of a website, a pay-per-click campaign, and third parties to break down cost per lead and then cost per rental and understand the ROI. So how to track leads through your site, calculating the ROI. And what this tells us, this is what we're going to look at for the website and other associated SEO, such as Google Local, which is those maps listings, Yahoo, and Bing as well. So you're going to use a unique VoIP tracking number on your website, of course, and then I would definitely suggest that you use a unique number for each location on your site. If you have stores in different markets, your website's going to show up differently in those markets for different search terms. And you want to understand the performance of each individual location on your site. So you definitely want to use a unique number for each location. I always suggest that you use local area code numbers. It's better for conversion rates. People want to call, if you're area code 913, they would like to call a 913 because they feel that they're going to speak to somebody that's local as opposed to an 888 number. Also, use the same number on your local listings, Google+, Yahoo Local, Bing Local. Using the same phone number on those lead sources really shows you an idea of not only through the website, but those Google Local, Yahoo Local, and Bing Local, those drive traffic straight to your website as well. But evermore, as people are using mobile websites on their mobile phones, if they see that Google Local listing, they just press the push to talk button. So you want to capture those calls as well and associate it with that same data. So calculating ROI. Calculate the total amount you spend monthly on your website, local listings, and any ongoing work such as SEO. Use this value to calculate the cost per lead and cost per rental. So, for example, in March you spend $500 on your website and SEO. So I would assume your SEO provider is also managing your Google Local, Bing Local, Yahoo listings. And you get 100 leads total. So your cost per lead is that $500 over the 100 leads, or $5 per lead. So we know that we're spending about $5 for every lead that comes through the website. Now remember, I said that cost per rental, a good approximation, is 1 in 7 calls rents, because you're going to have current customers call, you're going to have wrong numbers, you're going to have people calling for an auction. So cost per rental is going to be, for this example, $5 times that 7 to get $35 per rental. Now you may have an incredible sales team. Your managers can close 50% of all the calls that come in. But once again, like I just mentioned, you will have current customers call in to pay their bill. So it's always safe to go with that 1 in 7, whereas some people might think it should just be 1 in 2. So $35 per rental, that's pretty good. So what does this tell us? Cost per lead and cost per rental are a good way to put a dollar amount on the performance of your website and SEO. Once again, this takes into account any increase in visitors because you're going to get more leads. And the more leads through your website, the less your cost per lead and cost per rental. I did write down any cost per lead over $10 is too high. This is definitely seasonal, and it, of course, depends on market. We're going into the slower season. If you're around that $10, or even if you're just slightly higher, it's not significant cause for concern, but I would definitely evaluate your website. I would evaluate the SEO that your SEO company is doing for you, and try and understand, can you be doing better? One thing, actually, we've already done a webinar on understanding SEO for storage, and you guys can find that just by going to storageahead.com/webinars. I think it's the first one listed. And that might be a good resource if you're kind of in this boat and want to understand how am I doing online. So definitely check that out. Compare your cost per rental to your maximum cost per acquisition to decide whether your current SEO campaign is sustainable. So say that I know the lifetime value of a tenant at my facility is $400 or $500, and I've set my maximum cost per acquisition at $100. That's the amount I'm willing to spend, and I took into account my occupancy, what units I have left. I've only got 5x5, so I'm not going to spend $500 to get that renter. Well, if my cost per rental through my website and SEO is $35, then yeah, this marketing campaign makes sense. But it's those kinds of questions you've got to ask yourself about every marketing spend that you have, or you're going to be blindly spending money and you might very well be just losing money. Remember that changes in these values over time are going to happen. It's seasonal. We're in a seasonal industry. However, year-over-year data is extremely good as far as cost per rental to say what's going on with my website, what's going on with the billboard out front. If it's going up, then you've got an issue. If your cost per rental is going down, then you're doing pretty good. Something's going right. So next we're going to talk about pay-per-click tracking and ROI. So how to track phone leads through pay-per-click. Once again, we'll calculate the ROI using an example and what this tells us. So pay-per-click drives leads to your website. It can be tricky to isolate calls from your pay-per-click campaign because a person that clicks on the pay-per-click campaign is going straight to the website. So you say, Alex, you just told us to put a tracking number on my website. Now we're driving traffic from pay-per-click. I can't break it out. Well, there is a way to do it. It's really not too difficult, but you will probably need to use or talk to your website provider or the person that built your website to see if they can set this up for you. It's called dynamic number insertion. And this is the practice of inserting a different number onto your website if a visitor arrives from a pay-per-click campaign. Basically, it's some code on your website that says if the visitor arrives from this domain or this URL, show this phone number. This allows you to completely isolate pay-per-click phone leads from organic leads. You're going to separate any phone calls that are driven from pay-per-click from anybody looking at your Google local listing or Yahoo or Bing or somebody that just found your website. This gives you the ability to track the cost per lead and the cost per rental through pay-per-click. Because pay-per-click or cost per click for a PPC campaign varies between market, you will want to use a unique number for each store in your PPC campaign. This is so important, especially for pay-per-click, because every market is different. You could be paying $1 per click or you could be paying $10 per click. This is obviously going to greatly affect your cost per lead and therefore your cost per rental. So definitely use separate numbers for each store in your pay-per-click campaign. Calculating ROI. Just as with your website, you calculate your cost per lead and your cost per rental from calls generated through your pay-per-click campaign. For example, you spend $2,600 in March on pay-per-click and you get 20 phone calls. Your cost per lead then is the $2,600 divided by 20 or $130 per lead. And then I approximated again for the cost per rental, $130 times 7 or $910 per rental through pay-per-click. This is obviously very different from the $35 that we calculated through SEO and your website. And it does seem extremely high. However, this data is fairly accurate. Let's talk about that. What does this tell us? Pay-per-click is expensive. If you're paying even $4 for a visitor and you've got to make it all the way through picking up the phone, and then it has to be somebody who's interested in storage, and then it's got to be somebody who actually rents from you, by the time that whole process happens, we see an average cost per lead of pay-per-click around $125. The other thing here is that the lead source is not as qualified of a lead source as organic traffic or those maps listings. So instead of that 1 in 7, it may be higher. It may be 1 in 9, 1 in 10. So if you're spending $125 and up for every lead and it takes 10 leads to get a rental, we're talking over $1,000 to get a single rental. So compare that to your maximum cost per acquisition. Is the pay-per-click campaign you're running sustainable? This really is unique to every situation. You've got to look at your pay-per-click campaigns. I can't stress that enough because it is very feasible that you're spending way more money to get a rental through pay-per-click than it's worth. If you spend $1,000 for a 5x5 rental, clearly that's not worth it. Using VoIP tracking, listen to the calls that come through pay-per-click to understand the quality of the lead. Maybe in your market, pay-per-click works very well. Maybe it's cheap, you get a lot of traffic, and the phone calls are all good. So by having the VoIP tracking system, you can listen to those calls. Using this information, you can make an informed decision about whether or not pay-per-click is a right or a good marketing campaign for you. So the last example we're going to use is aggregators and third-party marketing sites. So I'm going to break this down into types of aggregators and cost associated and discuss, does this ROI make sense for your company? So the first one is the flat monthly fee. This type of third party works very well and can be very cost effective only if you're getting leads. If you're paying a flat monthly fee and you're not getting any leads through it, say you're paying $70 a month and you get no leads, then you're basically burning $70 a month with no benefit. I would suggest you only use a flat fee service if you can track the leads generated. Now, a lot of times these types of services will give you the ability to track leads. They'll have recorded phone calls on their system. They'll have reservations and direction prints. That's a sign that vendor knows what they're doing and they're willing to show you what you're getting. Another part of that is if this flat monthly fee service is month to month, nobody likes to sign year contracts on something they don't understand or don't know if it's going to work. And most flat monthly fee services, especially ones specific to our industry, are month to month. So definitely check that out. Understand the costs associated with and calculate your CPL and estimated CPR. Does the product make sense for your company when compared to your maximum cost per acquisition? As long as you stick with third-party marketing sites or even aggregators that are specific to our industry, I think you're going to find that they are fairly cost-effective lead sources. Next is the pay-per-reservation, a booking fee. These services charge a booking fee only for a reservation or a rental. Essentially, they are removing risk for you. However, you need to pay attention to the cost. If you are, you've got the dollar amount. You're not paying anything unless you get a rental. Say you pay $100 per rental. That's great. If you're paying $100 for a 5x5, does that make sense when you put that up against your maximum cost per acquisition? Does it make sense if you pay $100 for a 10x30? You've got to, using information specific to your company, specific to your location and your occupancy and all those different factors, understand whether or not this model works. A lot of times this is a very effective way to get leads. And once again, if they are part of our industry, they're generally quite effective. So I would definitely suggest you look at these sites as a lead source. And then pay-per-reservation, the percentage of rent model. This model asks you to pay a percentage of the rent for any reservations or rentals they send you. Generally, the percentage is 30% for the monthly rent of the lifetime of the lease, just like the other lead sources. Does this make sense? A lot of times this may not make as much sense. However, there are definitely cases where this works. I mean, you're giving away 1/3 of your revenue off of your rental from the start, but if you're a developer and your only goal is to fill up the property, if you are just empty and you need to increase your occupancy, if you just can't rent 10x30s and you want to list 10x30s, these are a great way. Once again, you're not really taking any risk. You're not going to pay for anything if you don't get a rental. So definitely look at it. If it makes sense, by all means use it. So in summary, and after this we'll jump into the Q&A session. So you can use VoIP tracking numbers to track your phone leads from multiple marketing campaigns. Use those VoIP tracking, use the data that you get from those tracking numbers to understand the ROI from your marketing by calculating your cost per lead and your cost per rental. And then, of course, compare that cost per rental to your maximum cost per acquisition to understand how marketing fits into your marketing plan. Does that marketing campaign work? Does it make sense financially? Does it fit into your marketing campaign? Maybe your dollars would be better spent on a different marketing campaign. So by using this data, you're going to really get a better idea of what's going on, and you're going to be able to make more informed decisions that really greatly affect your company. So with that, we will go ahead and open up the Q&A session. So go ahead and chat any in the questions box that you guys can think of. And we will take a look at that. So the first question is, what is the VoIP tracking? I'm guessing it's asking about data that you receive through VoIP tracking. So really the most important data that you're going to get through a VoIP tracking system is, one, the recorded call, so that you can listen to it and see if you really have a great lead source or if the leads coming through are not that valuable. Two, you're going to get the number of calls. Now, on top of that, it is important to see stuff like, when did they call? If you've got a pay-per-click campaign running and you've got tracking on it, and you see that most 90% of all the calls come after office hours and there's nobody to answer the phone, that tells you need to go in and edit your pay-per-click campaign so that it doesn't run after business hours. So you can really use those VoIP tracking tools as much or as little as you want. I know that they can provide caller ID information, lead source information, time, length of call, recorded call. There's lots of information that you can get from those. So the next question was, are you talking about buying numbers or leads? Definitely I'm talking about buying numbers, using tracking numbers. Those VoIP tracking numbers, you do have to pay for those. Generally what you'll find, companies will charge you for the number of lines, maybe a flat monthly fee per phone number per month, as well as minutes. Other ones give you a certain amount of numbers for no charge, and it's just a minute charge. So it varies by vendor. As far as buying leads, that's definitely pay-per-click is buying leads. You're buying visitors. You're paying to list at the top of Google. For somebody to click on that, you're paying a dollar amount for every click through to your website. So I'm not specifically talking about buying leads, but definitely talking about tracking all of your lead sources. What is a good pay-per-click budget per month is the next question that I got. Honestly, I can't give you a specific dollar amount because every market varies. And of course, it varies based on your store. If you're at 90% plus, I wouldn't do any marketing not any marketing. I wouldn't do any pay-per-click because you're at 90% occupancy or plus. If you really need to, if you're in a market that's not doing as well, if your property is not doing as well, I would definitely suggest that you start small, analyze the traffic that you're getting, analyze the calls that you're getting, and then increase or decrease from there. I wouldn't jump in and spend a lot of money from the start, but I think that pay-per-click cost varies so wildly between markets, and it's such a unique question based on market and based on property that I can't give you a great answer about that. Sorry. Next question is, what are special issues with locales near military bases? As far as issues, I can't really speak directly to that. I do see that you're going to get, obviously, near a military base, you're going to have a population that is very reliant on self-storage. They're traveling all the time. They're deployed. So a lot of people with properties near military bases are quite full. I think as far as marketing, what you're going to find is if you have a website up, you need to have a good website. I think that's probably number one, because the population around those military bases is generally quite young. They're tech savvy. They have nice phones. They have computers. And when they look online to rent a unit, they're more than likely going to reserve online. They're going to gather as much data as possible before ever picking up the phone and calling. So if you don't have a good website in that kind of market, I definitely think that you are missing out on some great leads and possibly a large amount of rentals. So the next question is, do you at storEDGE offer the dynamic number insertion? What is the cost? Truthfully, at storEDGE, we don't necessarily suggest that you run a pay-per-click campaign. If we do, we absolutely do dynamic number insertion, and the cost is extremely minimal because really the only cost associated with that is the tracking lines. Next question, we use a 3-mile radius for our pay-per-click campaigns. Is that a good number? I think in general, 3 miles is really a good number. I think the standard distance that people say in storage, and of course this varies based on urban or rural market, but 5 miles is generally where your lead sources or your leads are coming from. If you're within 5 miles, people are likely to pick up the phone and call. Outside of that, it's really going out of your way to get somebody to drive all that way to store. So 3-mile radius for pay-per-click is probably pretty good. You know, even more important than your radius for your pay-per-click campaign is stuff like negative keywords, stuff like turning your pay-per-click campaign off after business hours, really focusing on spreading that pay-per-click cost out across the month. A lot of times what you'll find is that people with a pay-per-click campaign will run out. You know, the beginning of the month, they get a lot of hits. Well, if you're getting a lot of hits at the beginning of the month, that's likely your current customers calling to pay their bill, right? And you don't want to spend money on pay-per-click for your current customers. So there's a couple ways around that. Negative keywords being probably the most important. I would say turning off your pay-per-click campaign after office hours. It makes no sense to pay for a lead if they call at 3 a.m. And then making sure to spread that spend out across the month. Those are probably the top 3 most important things for pay-per-click. The next question is, I cannot separate organic clicks from pay-per-click right now. Is there a blended average cost per lead amount that I can use as a guide? Short answer, no. And the reason why is because cost or pay-per-click varies so wildly in effectiveness. Earlier what I said was you had a $2,600 spend and you got 20 phone calls for pay-per-click versus organic and the website, we had $500 spend a month and 100 leads. That ratio there's a huge difference there, right? You're spending a huge amount of money on pay-per-click and you're getting very few leads. And that's actually fairly accurate. You're likely to, if you really start following this and tracking it, you're going to notice that your pay-per-click campaign does not drive very many leads. It may drive click-throughs, and you may be spending a lot of money, but generally the lead quality is so low from pay-per-click that you're not going to get that many phone calls. So this varies based on the percentage of calls that you're getting versus organic. It also varies based on your market. The cost changes dramatically. I mean, if you're in Dallas, the cost per lead or cost per click for a pay-per-click campaign could be $15. So it varies so wildly. I think there's too many factors to have just a guide or a blended average to calculate a cost per lead. Do you think that in a facility where we're about 60% occupied, is it worth it to start a pay-per-click campaign? Once again, if you do start you have to understand your market. If you do start a pay-per-click campaign, I strongly suggest that you start with a low dollar amount and you do dynamic number insertion to make sure that you're tracking every aspect of that campaign. And then if you go through you let it run for a few months, you go through the data and you see that, hey, we're getting pretty good numbers here, our cost per lead's actually not that high, then yeah, definitely grow that spend. If you realize that you've spent $100 every month and you've gotten 0 leads, which is not too far-fetched, then I wouldn't start a pay-per-click campaign at all. I would just cancel it completely. So this is something you're going to have to test out. But using these concepts and these tools that we've discussed on this webinar, you'll be able to effectively manage a pay-per-click campaign, and you'll know whether or not it's working. Before you dive into a pay-per-click campaign, I would suggest that you evaluate some other options. Definitely make sure that your website's doing what it needs to be doing. Definitely make sure that you're using some of those in-industry or self-storage specific aggregators, whether they be third-party marketing sites or reservation model aggregators. I think that you're going to get a much better cost per lead through those, and you're probably going to be much more effective than you would through your pay-per-click campaign. The next question is, how long in months does it take to see results? I guess that's probably regarding pay-per-click. Pay-per-click is supposed to be instantaneous. You pay, you show up at the top of the Google search for whatever terms you want to show up for, whatever phrases. So as far as pay-per-click, if you set everything up correctly, you should be seeing results almost instantaneously. It's not like SEO or link building campaigns or the Google Maps, which definitely takes some time to grow and to do better online. Which is, once again, that's one of the things that people really like about pay-per-click campaigns. Looks like we don't have any more being typed in, so I really appreciate everybody joining today. If you do have any further questions, by all means, contact us here at Red Nova Labs. We're happy to discuss, what we do as far as lead tracking, what we do as far as pay-per-click, and what we would suggest you do with whatever website or whatever online lead source you guys are currently using. So give us a call. The phone number is listed on this slide. So thanks again. Have a great day.